Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Below the 38 Football and Adventures in South Korea. This is the weekend that was. We are a man short today. Luke is off getting massages in Southeast Asia, so it's just Mike and I here to tell you what happened in K-League 1, K-League 2, K3, and even K4. And I believe there's even going to be a discussion on the WK League as well. Hi, Mike.
How you doing?
Big shoes to step into today. We're relying on you to give us all the content about K-League 1.
Sure, absolutely, no problem. Many stadiums were about a third full, so that's my first insight there. But yeah, these aren't shoes I don't really want to fill because they clearly need a bit of odor eaters in them, to be honest. So I'll leave them by the door.
Fair game. We have a website, by the way. It's called belowthe38korea.com. We haven't really let anybody know about it yet, simply because we've just got the bones of it up. I think in the next couple of weeks or so, we'll start to really focus in on that and let you all know what's going on our website. But we finally, the point is we finally set up a website which will also show our YouTube videos. We'll give some previews, reviews, interviews, and whatever else. So I said more information on that coming up later on.
I must jump in
Below the 38
here as well, and apologies for those people who contacted me about the missing podcast videos last week. I'm glad to hear people are listening on the podcast, but there might be a little delay in this week's one as well because I unfortunately have a bit of a sad trip I have to make back to the motherland, as it were. So there might be a delay in the podcast this week, but they'll be up soon enough. So if you're listening through that, by all means, carry on.
They will be on YouTube. They should be on YouTube. This is Monday night we're recording this, so there's a good chance these will be on YouTube some point on Tuesday. At Below the 38, you can find us on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Certainly the only one of those I use regularly is Instagram. And I know Luke tends to keep the Twitter page going, and obviously we're all involved with the YouTube one. So let's have a look at the games that took place in K-League 1 over the weekend. Mike, just to let you know as well, we are not going to be previewing the Tuesday games at all this week. As I said, recording this on a Monday night. Tuesday in South Korea is Children's Day. There is a full schedule of matches on a Tuesday. But of course, by the time you listen to this, those games might have already taken place. We won't even talk about the table. We're just going to look back on what happened over the weekend in K-League 1 and have a deeper, longer dive into K-League 2, K3, K4, WK League, etc. So there were 6 matches in K-League 1 of the weekend. They were all on Saturday. The big news is probably FC Seoul's surprise 3-2 loss at home to Gimcheon Sangmu. Gimcheon had gone on a run of basically drawing a lot of games 1-1 in the early part of the season, but they've now won 2 out of the last couple of matches, which will take them well clear of the relegation zone. Doesn't matter because they're already going down. They're going down automatically, even if they win K-League 1 this season. There were 22,300 people at that game. Gimcheon went 1-0 up. Seoul responded to go 2-1 up, and amazingly, they threw that away. The lead changed hand 3 times in that game. Extraordinary match in Sangam. At the same time, I thought it was a poor crowd. I got to say, I talk about crowds a lot in this show, but the first Donghaean derby of 2026 between Ulsan HD and Pohang Steelers was won right at the death by Pohang in front of just 16,000 people at Munsu Stadium. Huge win for Pohang. Goal shy Pohang, but they've got the biggest win of their season to date. At 4:30 then, this is probably why Luke has jetted off to Southeast Asia, because Incheon had been beaten 1-0 at home by Gangwon FC. Must have felt nice for the Gangwon fans after losing Yoon Jung-won to Incheon after he took them to 3rd place in K-League 1 a couple of seasons ago. At 4:30 also on Saturday, Jeju SK have warmed up for the midweek game against Bucheon by being beaten 2-0 at home by Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors. A big win for Jeonbuk that kind of gets them back in the title race following Seoul's defeat. Speaking of Bucheon, they won away to Anyang. I was convinced Anyang were going to wipe the floor with Bucheon in this game. There's a lot of controversy in Anyang Stadium on Saturday night. We will definitely get on to that as the show progresses. And it wouldn't be a K-League 1 weekend if Gwangju hadn't conceded 5 goals. They did so again at home to Daejeon. Gwangju 0, Daejeon 5. And those Daejeon the fifth goal came early enough in the second half. At one point, I was thinking this could hit sixes or sevens. It's extraordinary what's happening in Guangzhou. We've talked about that on recent podcasts before. Lots of injuries, transfer embargoes, losing key players. They are now cut adrift at the bottom of the table. So that was K-League 1. I said the most significant result was Seoul's loss at home to Gimcheon Sangmu, and then following that, possibly a revitalized Pohang winning in Ulsan. So K-League 2. Did you go to a K-League 2 game at the weekend, Mike?
Sadly not. I strongly believe that our game was at 4:30. I had something else I had to deal with earlier in the day, but adulting and football don't always slot together nicely. Nevertheless, the K2 again was really where it was all at, and there were two big games that did not disappoint this weekend. Busan, this is not the big game by the way, but they had the 3-2 reverse hangover last weekend, somewhat remedied. It was a laborious 1-0 win over the still winless Gimhae. But it was up to the Blue Wings. They had to keep the pace with Busan if they won, and also with Busan only winning 1-0, a great chance for the Blue Wings to actually start accumulating goals scored. So if they do end up on the same points, then it's going to go down to whoever has the most goals, right? So Blue Wings, they were perfectly on track. They went in 1-0 at half time, and this is the first ever second tier Suwon derby as well. So really huge game. Something that was a K1 fixture not too long ago. So Go Seung-bin, I apologise, Go Seung-bom with the goal there. However, that second half would only belong to one side of Suwon, as the Blue Wings were torn to pieces when Ha Jung-woo got things going with an early leveller in the second half, and then Suwon would put two more past Suwon, with Ha getting his brace. This left the Blue Wings somewhat shell-shocked, 3 points off the top, and they're only now 3 points clear of third. And of course, one of the big talking points was issues within the crowd, when we're going to get onto that one a little bit later. But there was another big game, and that was between the boys from Mokdong and of course the emerging new rivalry in the K2 against Gimpo. The home side went ahead, then conceded, then found a late winner with some penalty drama. Actually, the Gimpo goalkeeper, Song Jong-hyun, he saved the initial effort. He saved the initial penalty from Eland. However, he was adjudged to have been off his line when the penalty was taken, so it was retaken, and Euler put it the other way, and then that was essentially the winner. But there was far more drama to come. With Gimpo chasing the game, Park Chang-hwan, who scored Eland's goal, he was clear, rounded the Gimpo goalkeeper, and then managed to just put it wide. Quite unbelievable, with just the empty net in front of him. But then things would get even worse for Gimpo. Diaz would be sent off as tempers really started to flare in that game. There were some really nasty challenges and things being left in. We say a lot of games seem meaningless in the K-League, but this season we're starting to see rivalries in both divisions emerge where perhaps there weren't before, which is always a good thing for the league. So some will be sent off, and then in the 107th minute, the Gimpo goalkeeper sived down Eland's Byung Kyung-jun, meaning Gimpo had two players red carded by the end of that game, which means Gimpo have tumbled now to 9th and are missing key players. But as I said, perhaps a taste of new rivalry in the K2, unless of course Eland managed to leapfrog Blue Wings in the coming weeks, but we'll see. And here's a surprise, Hwasong have popped up in the playoffs with a 2-0 home win against Ansan, and they now sit in 5th. There was a little bit of controversy there as a late Ansan equaliser was chalked off yet again. And again, somewhat questionably, and then Hwasong just went up and scored again. So they made it 2-0, and Chaduri's project, it's really slowly coming together there, and they're actually ahead of Daegu 10 games into the season, which is not perhaps something anyone would have predicted at the start of the season. So it's quite exciting what's going on down in Hwasong at the moment. Daegu did manage to get a win. It's been more than a month since their winning at home to lowly Gyeongnam. And also, we have to mention Cheonan. Have you ever heard of Cheonan? Well, they're a K2 professional club, but they're sitting just outside the playoffs as they beat local sort of rivals Asan 1-0 with a win. And they're local enough that I've accidentally driven to the wrong stadium before. I don't know how that happened, but they're not too far from each other. There were other games in the K2. This is the bit where there's less narrative, of course, but Songnam did get a win away at Yongin. As we've said, Songnam, very sad that this former giant of Asian football are now a lower second division team in the K-League 2, but they got a win at Yongin. Cheongju, well, just like Gwangju concede 5, Cheongju draw. And that was their 8th of the season with an exciting 0-0 away at 8th place Paju. But of course, big result for Jeonnam this weekend, as they didn't lose. But that's because they didn't play. It was their weekend off. Gimhae, of course, they now look dead and buried. 2 points from 9. Well, what's this? The K3 leader Shihung actually dropped points this weekend with a 1-1 draw down at Changwon. This means Busan Gyeotong closed the gap to just 7 points with a 2-1 win at Dangjin. But there was a bit of a cheeky post-match photo from the Busan Gyeotong or Busan Transport supporters, as they said, 7 points, no problem. So we'll see how that goes. But by the way, we've mentioned Gimhae are winless, right? Well, Jeonbuk 2 are the only other club in Korea's top 4 leagues that are without a win this season. So let me repeat that. Jeonbuk haven't won a game this season. Well, the K3 version anyway. Speaking of other leagues, Incheon and Suwon both lost in the Women's K-League, the WK League, leaving Mungyong now 3 points clear. But Sejong, Gangjin, Hwacheon are all within 3 points of third place Suwon. So a lot of games are getting high stakes, especially going towards this coming or next weekend's round of fixtures. Probably the most exciting round yet in the WK League. But of course, in the K-League 4, remember there is promotion and relegation all the way from K1 down to K4 starting this year. So the K4 matters more than it's ever mattered before. But, why care about the promotion chase in the K4 when you can go all the way down to the basement club? So Andrew's going to tell us a little bit about his journey on Sunday.
That's right, yep. I went to my first K4 match of the season. Not my first K4 match ever, I'm glad to announce, but definitely my first K4 game of the year. Pyeongtaek Citizen hosted Namyangju FC. Not exactly a top-of-the-table clash. Pyeongtaek were bottom going into the game, and that's where they're going to stay. Namyangju moved up to 4th thanks to a 2-1 win. I don't have anything else really to say about it. There was about 100 people at the game. I've always wanted to see the stadium. It's typical of a lot of other grounds you see in Korea at this level. A multi-purpose stadium with very minimal roof coverage just over basically the VIP section of the main stand. 4 floodlights, all fantastic to look at. So the running track, lots of concrete, very few people at the game. Nice views over the back of some small mountains, apartments, forests, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, Pyeongtaek have won 1 out of their 8 matches so far, and I see that their goal difference is already minus 12 at this point in the year, whereas Namyangju are trailing Jinju. Jinju have won all 8 matches, so at this point you got to figure they're looking good for a potential promotion to K3. K4 is interesting. I'd like to think that if I was living in Pyeongtaek, I would go and watch these games. Probably not every weekend that they're playing at home, but try and do as many as possible. And there's one guy with a drum, and he sings all the songs, and then he gets all the chants going. And then there's about a dozen or so people sitting around us beside the drummer who would clap along and occasionally sing along. And that's basically what an atmosphere is like at a K4 game. So it's worth checking out, especially because of Footballogy. I probably would not have gone if Footballogy not existed, but it needed to get that new stadium badge, Mike.
Yes, indeed. Well, it must be said, Ansan won 6 matches last season, and one of them was against Pyeongtaek. So
it tells you what they're all about.
It does indeed,
I guess. Yeah, there's a lot of there's the great thing about K4 as well is if you're looking at this table, there's obviously a lot of cities to go to that don't have an otherwise a professional football team like Jinju, and they have a massive stadium as well. Pyeongchang, where the Olympic Games were held, the Winter Olympic Games, about 6 or 7 years ago. Goje Island have a team. Sosan Pioneer in the middle of nowhere in Central Korea. They have a team. Gijan United, Jaechon. There's just towns and cities that you might never have heard of because they don't have another club in the top division. There's a team called Seoul Jung'an. So obviously there are 2 professional sides playing in Seoul at the moment, and Seoul Jung'an are the 3rd team to appear in the capital city.
Goje Island would be a fantastic. If you're going to visit Korea and you're going to go somewhere very quirky, a lot of history on the island, wonderful place, a very pretty part of Korea, I guess. Down just off the southeast coast, right? I think that would be quite a cool little, tourist footballogy trip. Must mention Ansan yet again because you did mention Pyeongchang. They visited Ansan a few seasons ago in the cup. Can you guess who the winner there was?
Pyeongchang.
Yes, it was. So,
wow, they beat Ansan. Nice.
just another day at the War Stadium.
Yeah.
So, yeah, K4. Again, the National League used to be like this. I think that's why I've managed to get to I'll see some very quirky teams that sadly many of them have now long since folded. But you see things you don't normally see if you're just stuck. Especially when the K1's always been such a small league in terms of clubs. It can be a bit repetitive, I imagine. But anyway, talking points. Because I was at a game this weekend. And that was, of course...
Yeah. So actually, before you go on to that, so I think there's a good point to mention this. So the 2 significant matches, if you don't mind me putting it in such terms, that we went to, we've actually developed some talking points from these matches that we think are worth discussing. So the kind of section of where were we, where this began, is basically just going to be turned into a couple of talking points. A controversial closing to the game in Anyang that Mike was at, and the game that I was at, the Suwon Derby, was not controversial for what happened on the pitch. It's just more interesting for what happened off the pitch. So let's go to you then. Anyang 0, Bucheon 1. What happened?
Yeah, this is a game I had penned in as soon as the fixtures were announced because it was obviously the first time they've played each other in the top tier. It was a K2 fixture 2 years ago. I was quite interested to see what's changed amongst these 2 teams. And I must say what happened on the pitch was really not worth it. This had 0-0 written all over it. I thought, here we go. It's the first of the season. But Bucheon did have a significant returning figure in the midst. And that was, of course, the bombastic Basani, who set up Bucheon's winner. But really, the game will be talked about for a long time for what happened at the end. And, of course, later on in the game, let's say Matthias Bucheon has certainly been physical with them, and there was an altercation where his shirt was being pulled and he kind of lashed out. Now, from the stands, it looked really bad, actually, but looking back on the highlights, it doesn't look as bad as it did in the stadium yet. He was given a straight red, so that was the first point of the first talking point, which was a big problem. And then Anyang did equalise. Now, it was adjudged that the Anyang player fouled the Bucheon keeper. Now, some have contested this and said Kazu, the Bucheon midfielder, pushed the Anyang player, and that's how he collided with the keeper. I've watched that a few times, and it does look like he's already airborne before Kazu makes contact. So to me, that does look like maybe the goal being ruled out was perhaps the correct decision.
I think he knew what he was doing as well. That's what my interpretation of that was, that Kim Yong-chan knew what he was doing in that situation.
However, the balancing for Anyang definitely was a ball from Anyang into the box, and it's not like when VAR you can get this one magic still that looks really bad. I mean, you can just take this from any angle, and you can just imagine one of those WWE commentators shouting a move as he just completely manhandles him in the box, and it's hard. It looks like a nailed on penalty. What happened after that was the referees were escorted from the pitch with a Roman phalanx. If
Umbrellas.
you've ever watched Asterix, imagine that with with the umbrella tortoise marching off the pitch. The Anyang fans stayed behind. They chanted, they sang at the referees' cars as they were leaving. It was not a pleasant atmosphere, I must say, to be honest. I think rather than getting into direct opinions, because you can look at the highlights about what's available and judge by yourself, but I must say increasingly, and again I've seen Ansan denied. I'm not saying the goals that Ansan have lost would have made us playoff contenders, but to me that doesn't really matter, because the goals are goals. We shouldn't be seeing decisions made on what appear to be hypotheticals. A little bit of Occam's razor on the VAR might help referees make decisions that say that it's 90% clear what's happened. So why say just because it could be a foul, therefore it must be? And I increasingly get the feeling that the stories of this league are basically being post-edited, by a very poor copy editor. That's what VAR feels like in this league. And to put the cat among the pigeons, here's a discussion point that might be considered somewhat controversial, if you like. In that Elan Gimpo game, that was a really fiery game, and there were a lot of serious decisions. There were 2 red cards, a retaken penalty, etc. And it may look like that was all in favour of Eland. However, I've looked at those a few times, and it does look like all the decisions were actually made correctly in that one. And I do wonder if there's a cultural point here, because that was a female referee. Is there something to that? I'm not going to say, but I think a talking point that needs to be developed, that perhaps should be talked about more as we go through, because let's remember that there are no Korean referees yet again refereeing at this summer's World Cup. Korea, in terms of its football standing, is a top 25, I forget the rankings, it's 22nd, 23rd. Nevertheless, Korea has a couple of world iconic players, but they have no referees represented. A lot needs to be reconsidered, because it's affecting the worst thing this affects are those in the stadiums watching the games. They're the people who are hurt most by the fact that these are talking points, and I think those talking points need to be considered a little wider, so we can perhaps find a way to improve the end product of the K-League.
Yeah. I agree with all that. The non-penalty decision, that's the one that Anyang seemed to be most aggrieved about, and I mean you can understand why. Like there's no way you can look at that and think that's a fair challenge. It just doesn't make any sense. It's an appalling decision. As you said, now this is one example, but when you add all these things together, it does paint a picture that officiating is of a low enough standard in this country that A, we're talking about it all the time, and B, as you clearly outlined, there are no Korean officials, even VAR officials, I think, but certainly touch judges or referees assistants and referees, none of them are going to the World Cup. It's absolutely unbelievable stuff. So yeah, very, very controversial end to the game in Anyang. That was the first ever meeting between Anyang and Bucheon in K-League 1, as you said. I was at the first ever meeting between Suwon and Suwon in K-League 2. I won't talk about the match. It doesn't really matter. You said in your synopsis of how the weekend went that they were destroyed, something like that, the Blue Wings. And my interpretation at the stadium was exactly that. When I was watching this game, I thought they were being dismantled. And then it's funny how stats can paint a totally different picture. And it just shows that when you're watching something with your eyes, it's much more important than wasting time looking at these stats. When you look at these stats, the Blue Wings had 60% possession to Suwon FC's 40. They had 12 shots on goal and 7 on target to Suwon's 4 on goal, which were all on target. They lost the game 3-1. But the second half just felt like a procession. It was going to happen. The Blue Wings were going to be beaten in this game. And they were well beaten in the end. But the thing I wanted to talk about was, I've mentioned this before, and I'm afraid we're going to mention it again. It's time to talk about away fans at a K-League game. Because there were 9,300 people at that match yesterday. The stadium holds around 11,500. I think it was sold out. There might only be a couple of seats left over. But there were approximately 180 Blue Wings fans ejected. They were spotted and ejected from the stadium. What happened was in the section that I was standing on, opposite the main stand, kind of close to where the away fans were, there were 6 or 7 security officers in that area, and they were at the top, and they were at the middle part of the stand, and then there was one lady was pitch side on the running track, and they were looking for fans of the wrong team, of the opposition team, and then they were ejecting them. And especially after Suwon had won a penalty in the first half, which was later overturned by VAR, that decision to award the penalty, a lot of the fans who were in the wrong section made themselves known, and then they were subsequently thrown out. Now, my problem with this is, like we've talked about before, across from where I was standing, where the away fans section meets the main stand, there's no segregation there. The opposition fans could high five each other. They could just share beers and snacks, crackers with each other. There was a small wall with gaps in it separating the two fans. But for some reason, the stand that I was in had this huge block of seats that were empty. And then we have this situation where about 180 people are ejected from the stadium. Now, I get it. Like, you shouldn't be in the home fan section. The signs were up on the TV saying if you're wearing a away team uniform or you're spotted cheering for the opposition team, you will be ejected from the stadium. Why are there empty seats all over a stadium? Like, if the demand is there, why can't you cater for it? Like, there's no reason to have segregation. Those 180 people also could have just been moved into those sections there. Perhaps they wanted to make a point by ejecting them from the stadium, but I've seen this too often now. It's gone on far too long, and teams they're restricting the amount of money that they can earn by not selling enough tickets. You also have what I think is an even bigger issue, which is K-League has an attendance problem. There's only 60,000 people at the Donghaean Derby at the weekend. The league needs more people to show up. So why are there empty seats when people could fill those seats? Like, there is a demand for these seats. You should supply them for it. I just can't understand why this is still a thing. Like, kicking people out of stadiums, telling people they're not allowed in to stadiums that are not full. It's absolutely crazy. I just wish they would sort this out. Sell more tickets. But that's my feeling of it anyway. It's so frustrating. It's so unbelievably frustrating.
Just looking at the average attendances at Castle Park, and there were 5,000 home fans at the game before this against Yongin, but the other home games have been 2,100 up to 3,000. So clearly, it could be said that there's 2,000 official Blue Wings fans at that game, yet the attendance is 9,000. Increased local interest, or there's at least 2,000 to 3,000 Blue Wings fans which were not detected in that game. Just behave yourself, perhaps. That's what we can say.
I know they could. The thing is, I agree with that. They should be able to behave themselves better. But I said, just sell more tickets. The demand is there, and this league has an attendance problem. And by selling more tickets to some of these games, it will help those attendance problems. Why not sell more tickets? You know, it just baffles me that we're still talking about this, and this is going to come up again. Like, I was at the game in Yongin not too long ago. The stadium is about 80% empty, and yet the away fan section is sold out. There's dozens of blocks available where you could just sell more tickets for. Like, instead of just kicking people out of stadiums or stopping them from entering stadiums that were nowhere near full, why not just sell more bloody tickets and then allow more people to show up? That's my feeling on it. It drives me mad. I think it's absolutely crazy. But also, what Suwon FC, of course, should have done was not eject those Blue Wing fans and made them watch to the conclusion of that game as the punishment, because they would have seen yet another, and I've been at these games before, yet another Suwon FC demolition of the Blue Wings. That would have been an even better punishment.
Well, certainly something for hindsight. Of course, unless they end up playing each other in the playoffs, which is now is a small possibility. I'd probably say perhaps unlikely, but this might be the last game at Castle Park this season. What will we see Suwon FC fans mingling in the home section at Suwon World Cup Stadium later in the season?
Well, they won't need to. They won't. They simply just won't. They won't fill their allocation. I think it's just the reality of it. It'd be cool if they did. I mean, I don't know when they're playing each other, actually, in the return fixture. I probably should know that. But they should be able to sell out the entire away allocation in the south stand of the Suwon World Cup Stadium. But I've been at those matches before and they haven't done so. So I believe that probably won't happen again. Anyway, I'm tired. I'm tired of complaining about these things. I just wish they could fix this, you know?
Just to give you a feeling of attendance in this league, in the K2 anyway, almost 9% of all the fans in that Hwasong Ansan game were actually away fans. So only 148 away fans. Gives you a little idea of just how atrocious some of the home attendances can be in the K League too.
Right. So as we're saying, this league, both of these leagues have attendance problems. It's not a great look sometimes. We said like the last midweek set of fixtures are on in K League 1 on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. The combined attendance for the 6 matches was around 31,000. I know it's a midweeker, but still, you know, it's not unheard of that certain, you know, some other leagues and some other teams bring a lot of fans to away games even during the week. So yeah, I think if you have a problem with attendances and people are not showing up, then you should be doing everything you can to have more people showing up. That's my deflated, you know, partially angry, annoyed opinion.
I think you're just thinking about all those trips to Cheonan and Hwasong, etc. that Blue Wings fans may have again next season.
Looking forward to those. Anything else to talk about this week? Is that it for the weekend that was?
That is indeed. It's another weekend where there's been some good stories and good tales and good games, but there's one tale that we really want to stop talking about, especially when you've got teams almost officially, you know, the teams and fans coming out being very upset about this. We want to focus on the football and the narrative, not on decisions.
Yeah, I agree. Well, look, hopefully the next time we have a chat, the situation is going to be a little bit better. You and I will be back for the K League 2 preview podcast. Another good weekend of football coming up in K League 2. As I said, there'll be no K League 1 podcast for the midweek fixtures. There's no time to get it done. Luke is getting massages in Southeast Asia. So that's it for the weekend that was. Thank you so much for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave some comments, and let us know if you think Mike and I are right or wrong, or a bit of both on the points that have really bothered us for this week. Thanks for watching.